I've worked the night shift at Blackwood Memorial Library for 17 years. Not many people last that long here. The day shift librarians come and go. Fresh faces with new degrees and eager smiles. Their world is simple, normal, safe. My world starts at 10 p.m. when they leave. The library sits on the edge of town, where streetlights end and the old growth forest begins. A Victorian monstrosity built in 1887 by my great-grandfather, Thomas Blackwood. Few connect the name to me. I prefer it that way. Most assume being a night librarian is boring, just shelving books in an empty building. They're wrong. The library is never truly empty after midnight. The first time I heard it, I was 23, a soft rustling from biographies, like someone turning pages. When I checked, there was no one there. You learn to recognize the sounds, the normal ones. Heating system groans, elevator hums, pipes knocking. And then there are the other sounds, pages turning when no one's there, whispers between stacks, footsteps that stop when you turn around. I'm writing this as a guide for whoever replaces me. The hiring manager probably told you this was cushy. They didn't mention the rules. My predecessor left me nothing. I had to learn everything the hard way. I won't do that to you. In this library, ignorance isn't bliss. It's dangerous. Windows become mirrors after dark, reflecting endless shelves. Sometimes reflections don't match reality. Extra books appear. Gaps form. Occasionally someone walks past in the reflection when no one is there. Don't turn around when that happens. The security guard leaves at midnight. Budget cuts, so it's just you, alone with 500,000 books and whatever else dwells between shelves. 10 hours to survive. If you're smart, you'll follow the rules. They've kept me alive for 17 years. And if you're not smart, well, the library's always looking for new books. I learned most rules too late. My first week I noticed oddities. Books reshelf themselves. Certain sections feel colder. The elevator stops at floors that don't exist. Martin Phillips was the night librarian before me. Official story. Nervous breakdown after 22 years. Left mid-shift and never returned. I've seen his handwriting in old logs. Notes about movements between stacks and warnings. Don't follow the sounds and stay in the light. His final entry. It knows my name now. I keep these logs hidden. Day staff wouldn't understand. For them, this is just a building with books. I've tried telling them. Once I mentioned how biographies rearrange themselves overnight, the head librarian suggested I take vacation time. Night shifts can be disorienting, she said. I never brought it up again. There have been incidents. A student found unconscious in medieval history. A researcher who claimed text changed while reading. The janitor who refused to clean the third floor after dark. And larger incidents. The fire in rare books that didn't trigger sprinklers. The graduate student found catatonic. The children who went missing during an evening program, reappearing 3 days later with no memory. I compiled 5 essential rules. If you find yourself in an aisle you don't recognize, turn around and leave immediately. The security cameras sometimes show extra shelves. Do not investigate. If you hear pages flipping but no one is nearby, ignore it. The lights flicker at 3 a.m. That means it's time to close. If you find a book with your name on it, do not open it. These rules are the difference between walking out at 8 a.m. and becoming another missing person report. Last month, a new security guard started asking questions. Instead of telling him everything, I said it was just an old building with old pipes. They found his flashlight on the 3rd floor the next morning. He hasn't been seen since. Between midnight and 2 a.m., I have a routine. I check all floors, reshelf books, update catalogs. Normal tasks in a building that only pretends to be normal. I bring my own coffee. I don't use the break room machine anymore. Not since finding it had brewed a full pot by itself. The liquid thick as ink. The library has a particular smell at night. Old paper, leather, and something earthy I can't identify. Some nights are perfectly ordinary. Those nights are rare. Most nights have incidents. A book falls from a shelf. Lights dim. Temperature drops in a specific aisle. I have mental maps of places to avoid after certain hours. Mythology after 1 a.m. The entire third floor after 2:30. I keep a small radio at the desk. The library seems to like Bach. Disturbances are less frequent when his preludes play. I always bring salt. A thin line across certain thresholds. A circle around my desk on bad nights. The first time I saw something truly inexplicable was during my 3rd month. A shadow that moved wrong. Not following any person. Just sliding along the floor. Pausing at shelves as if browsing. The next night, 3 books from that section were on the floor. Open to passages about things lurking in dark waters. I reshelved them without reading too closely. The cameras are mostly reliable. That's how I noticed the extra shelf on camera 7. A bookcase wedged between others where no space should exist. I checked the floor plan. According to the layout, there was no room for another shelf. Yet there it was on camera 7. I should have followed rule 2. Do not investigate. But this was early in my tenure. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the reference section. The reference section looked normal when I arrived. No extra shelf, just familiar encyclopedias. But on camera 7, the phantom shelf still appeared. That's when I understood rule 2 wasn't just precaution. It was lifeline. Let me explain rule 1. If you find yourself in an aisle you don't recognize, turn around and leave immediately. The building changes after midnight. An aisle might seem longer. By 2 a.m., entire sections shift. New corridors open. By 3 a.m., parts of the library don't correspond to any architectural plans. 2 years in, we hired an intern, Morgan, studying library science. She lasted 3 weeks. During her final shift, she went to reshelve in psychology and disappeared for 40 minutes. I found her in the children's section, shaking uncontrollably. The shelves wouldn't end, she kept saying. And then I saw myself. But I was wrong. My eyes were... She shuddered. Morgan never returned. I've had my close calls. Once, shelving in American history, I noticed the aisle growing longer with each step. I immediately turned back. Behind me, footsteps matched my pace. I kept my eyes forward until I reached the main desk. We've lost 3 pages and 1 janitor to unknown aisles. People who didn't know to turn back. Last year, I found my great-grandfather's original blueprint. It showed 7 floors, not 4. A note. Floors 5-7 removed from final construction due to structural concerns. But sometimes, late at night, the elevator buttons light up for floors that don't exist. Strange classification numbers appear after 2 a.m. Regular Dewey Decimal numbers interspersed with symbols I've never seen. Books with these designations appear and disappear throughout the night. I've started mapping the shifting layout. There's logic to it. The library doesn't transform randomly. It follows rules of its own. Or maybe that's just what it wants me to think. Rule 2 exists for a reason. The security cameras sometimes show extra shelves. Do not investigate. The cameras show more than extra shelves. Sometimes extra rooms, corridors that don't exist, doors where there should be walls. Ask David Chen, head of security 6 years ago. One December night, he noticed an extra glass case in special collections on camera 12, filled with glowing books. I'm going to check it out, he said after confirming it wasn't a glitch. I watched him on monitors. Camera 11 showed him entering special collections. Camera 12 showed him walking past where the case should be. There's nothing here. His voice crackled through the radio. On camera 12, I could see the glass case behind him, pages flipping rapidly. David, I said, the case is right behind you. He turned, saw nothing, then froze. Hearing something I couldn't, he walked forward, straight through where the case appeared on my screen. The moment he passed through, both he and the case vanished from camera 12. 3 days later, morning staff found his flashlight on a table in periodical. David himself was never found. The anomalies follow patterns. They last exactly 9 minutes and 27 seconds. Why that duration? The library has its own mathematics. Sometimes cameras show people after hours. Patrons browsing shelves. Their movements are too smooth. Occasionally, one will turn their head a full 180 degrees and stare directly at the camera. Last month, camera 9 showed 7 books sliding out from an extra shelf. The first letter of each title spelled, "Find Us." 3 weeks ago, I noticed something troubling. Every camera had a hand pressed against the lens from the other side. The next night, the anomalies resumed. But the barrier had thinned. I knew near, but the barrier had thinned. Whatever existed on the other side wasn't content to wait any longer. It was finding its own way through. Rule of 3. If you hear pages flipping but no one is nearby, ignore it. During my second month, I noticed deliberate page turning from various sections. The first time I investigated, I found an art history book open on a table, pages turning by themselves. I've learned to distinguish different types of readers by their sounds. The scholars are most common and least dangerous. Their page turning is methodical. They prefer educational materials and always return books properly. The skimmers are faster, more erratic. They favor reference materials. Then there are the devourers. Their page turning starts slowly, but accelerates until pages flip at impossible speed. They prefer obscure philosophy and special collections. If you hear pages turning with increasing speed, walk away immediately. 5 years ago, a graduate student named Elliot was working late. I found him staring at a book with pages turning rapidly by themselves. "They're reading to me," he whispered. "They're showing me what's between the words." When I turned him away from the book, his pupils were dilated until almost no iris was visible. Text scrolling across the black surfaces. The book slammed shut. Elliot collapsed unconscious. He woke up 2 days later with no memory of the incident, complaining of words that crawl. He dropped out the following week. 3 months ago, I found a bookmark in a book read by a devourer. Made of thin, translucent material, it contained a message. "We see you watching. We know you listen. Soon we'll turn your pages too." Last week, I heard writing from the empty biography section. Later, I found a biography of my great-grandfather with fresh ink on the final page. He built the library to keep them contained, not to let them out. When I woke the next morning, my fingers were stained with ink I couldn't remember using. Rule 4. The lights flicker at 3 a.m. That means it's time to close. At precisely 2:57 a.m., lights flicker 3 times. You have 3 minutes to prepare. My routine is precise. I close any books, shut down computers, ensure all doors between sections are closed. I return to the main desk, switch on the brass lamp, the only light that never flickers, and wait. At 3 a.m., the overhead lights go out. For 27 minutes, the library changes. The first time it happened, I was unprepared. I heard thousands of books shifting on shelves in perfect unison. My flashlight caught shadows moving between stacks, too tall and fluid to be human. At 3:27 a.m., the lights returned. I checked security footage the next day. Between 3:00 and 3:27 a.m., all cameras showed static. Frank Torres, the night janitor, ignored my warning one March night and stayed to clean the 3rd floor past 3 a.m. I heard his cleaning cart crash upstairs, followed by his fearful voice, suddenly silenced. Breaking protocol, I went looking for him. On the 3rd floor, I found his cart tipped over near the bathroom. From beneath the closed door, dark liquid spread across the floor. Inside, no Frank. But when my flashlight passed across the mirror, it didn't reflect the bathroom. It showed the library with 7 floors, shelves stretching to impossible heights, and tall figures with too many limbs examining books. In the center stood Frank, frozen in terror. I stumbled backward, dropping my flashlight. Something cold brushed my face. Not a hand, but something with too many fingers. A voice whispered. He stepped through. "Will you follow, librarian?" I ran back to the desk. At 3:27 a.m., the lights returned. Frank never came down. 3 days later, all bathroom mirrors cracked simultaneously. In one, I found a handprint pressed from the other side, with too many fingers. Sometimes at 3:13 a.m., I see dark liquid seeping from between certain books, thick like ink, but smelling like blood. I started to understand fragments of the whispers that fill the library during the dark hour. According to a book on ancient languages, the words haven't been spoken by humans in 12,000 years. But something in this library still speaks it, and I'm beginning to understand what they're saying. Rule of 5. If you find a book with your name on it, do not open it. These books simply manifest on shelves, as if they've always belonged there. The first one I found wasn't mine. A burgundy volume with Marjorie Winters in gold script. Marjorie was a regular patron. When I reached to open it, static electricity ran up my arm, and I returned it unopened. Marjorie never returned. 2 weeks later, her obituary appeared in the paper. More books appeared for other patrons. Each time, something happened to the person. Michael Chen abandoned his doctorate. Dr. Harrison became obsessed with excavating her basement. Thomas simply vanished. I began quarantining these books behind the reference desk. Then Patricia Moore found hers before I could intercept it. "Look at this," she laughed. "Someone's idea of a joke. Put it back," I warned. She opened it anyway. Her expression changed instantly to shock. "It has everything," she whispered. "My whole life. Things nobody knows." Her fingers trembled as she turned pages. "It has things that haven't happened yet." She slammed the book shut and left. She resigned the next day, leaving no forwarding address. I developed a theory. These books aren't predictions. They're contracts. By opening the cover, you consent to the story written inside. Yes, mine appeared 3 years into my employment. A black leather volume with silver embossing. Jonathan Blackwood. I've never opened it, but it reappears with increasing frequency. Recently, the blank cover changed. Below my name, gold script appeared. "Time is running out at 3:01 a.m. last night." My locked drawer opened by itself. My book rose into the air, pages turning toward the end. A pen hovered before me, offering itself. The book had turned to a signature line on the final page. I didn't sign. At 3:27 a.m., the book fell to the desk. I still haven't looked inside. Last week, a black leather book appeared on new arrivals. As I watched, gold lettering slowly formed a name. The name of my replacement. Your name. When you arrive for your first shift, it will be waiting. Remember Rule 5. If you find a book with your name on it, do not open it. Some stories are better left unread. 2 months ago, Blackwood Memorial hired Iris Chen as assistant night librarian. I noticed her hunger immediately, eyes darting to shelves, fingers trailing along spines, head tilting as if listening for something beneath normal sounds. "I've heard so much about you and this place," she said. "This library has quite a reputation in certain circles." "What circles?" I asked sharply. "Academic communities interested in architectural anomalies, people who appreciate unique collections." During her first night, she asked about special procedures for the night shift. "Jonathan, we both know this isn't a normal library," she said calmly. "I've spent years researching places like this, locations where boundaries between spaces flex. For the first time in 17 years, I was talking to someone who might actually believe me." I gave her the basic rules. "That's not all of them, is it?" she asked as we heard pages turning from American literature. Before I could stop her, she was already investigating. I found her watching an open book hovering at eye level, pages turning faster and faster. "Rule 3, I snapped. "If you hear pages flipping but no one is nearby, ignore it." The book slammed shut and fell to the floor. Then it began to change, the cover bubbling, splitting open like a mouth. A vibration emerged that resonated in my bones. I pulled Iris to safety. "You could have been killed," I said, By a book? She looked confused. By what's inside the book? I told her everything. The shifting aisles, camera anomalies, the invisible readers, the 3 a.m. darkness, the personal books, all the rules I'd learned over 17 years. This is even more significant than I anticipated, she said, eyes bright. This isn't just a haunted building, Jonathan. It's a crossroads between realities. I realized she hadn't applied to be a librarian. You're a paranormal investigator? I prefer interdimensional researcher, she smiled. I study places like this. That night we experienced the 3 a.m. event together. The darkness felt heavier, more alert. At 3:13 a.m. we heard footsteps and Frank's voice calling from the darkness. A book appeared on the desk, showing a sketch of us staring at it. A perfect loop. For a week, Iris followed the rules. Then I found her note, testing a theory about dimensional boundaries on the 4th floor. If I'm not back by 2 a.m., check camera 14. Camera 14 showed Iris in a transformed archives room with impossible shelves. As I watched, she approached a large book on a pedestal. When she touched it, pages whipped past in hurricane wind. And she touched it. Pages whipped past in hurricane wind. Then she vanished. I found her later in reference, shaking violently. Her eyes changed, pupils elongated into vertical slits. I saw what the library really is, she whispered, her voice layered with strange harmonics. It's not a building, Jonathan. It was never a building. It's a binding. A binding. Your great-grandfather didn't build a library. He built a prison. But prisons work both ways. They keep things in, and they keep things out. As the 3 a.m. warning flickered, she left a final message in her notebook. The binding fractures. The book with your name was never about you. It was about the library itself. I've gone to find answers on the true 7th floor. Don't follow. It's already too late for me. I opened my book that night. It wasn't about me. It was about the library. The first pages showed Blackwood Memorial as originally designed. 7 floors, not 4. Annotations in my great-grandfather's handwriting crowded the margins. Beneath the library lay a complex foundation with layered circles and symbols. My family had been appointed caretakers of an elaborate prison, disguised as a public institution. Each night, librarian was chosen from Blackwood descendants, serving exactly 17 years before being released from duty. The final page contained a signature line with text, the Blackwood obligation. 17 years served, 17 years earned. The choice comes but once. A key fell from the book, the key to the 7th floor. As I entered the library for my final shift, the building had changed. Where there had been 4 stories, now I could see 7, the upper floors hazy, as if viewed through heat distortion. On the 7th floor, I discovered it wasn't a floor at all. It was a viewing platform. Beyond transparent walls stretched an impossible landscape with massive non-Euclidean libraries. Between them moved beams of pure information, entities composed of living text. In the center stood what had once been Iris. Her skin had become translucent, revealing pages and text instead of flesh. They are the librarians, Jonathan, she said. The true ones. We are their books. Human history imagination. It's all text to them. It's all text to them. Your great-grandfather tried to prevent them from reading us too closely. And the choice I have to make, the binding weakens. Every 17 years, a Blackwood must decide. Strengthen the barrier, or let it fall completely. She pointed to my book. Your ancestors chose to maintain the separation. They became part of the architecture, living locks in the barrier. And if I refuse, the barrier fails. The librarians enter our reality completely. They read us all. Everything changes. I approached the glass, studying the entities. They weren't malevolent, just curious beings of pure information. The anomalies I'd witnessed were symptoms of boundary failure. I looked at my book's contract page. For 17 years I had followed the rules, kept my head down, survived. I reached for a pen, feeling the weight of generations who had made the same choice before me. The nib touched the page. Ink began to flow. Then I stopped. I choose neither option, I said. Not lock, not release. There must be a third way. That isn't possible. Not Iris said. The binding requires a Blackwood. It doesn't specify how that Blackwood must serve. I held up the key. My great-grandfather built this place as a boundary that allows observation without interference. I intend to maintain that purpose, but on new terms. I placed my hand against the glass. On the other side, an entity mirrored my gesture. On the other side, an entity mirrored my gesture. A crack appeared where our hands connected. Not breaking, but opening. What have you done? Not Iris whispered. Changed the story, I replied. The entity extended itself through the opening, not to consume, but to communicate. I reached out in return. In that moment of contact, I understood. The librarians weren't invaders, but custodians. Blackwood Memorial wasn't just a prison. It was an embassy, a point of controlled contact between worlds. But fear had corrupted its purpose. The boundary had become too rigid. We weren't meant to be locks. We were meant to be translators. Since that night, the library has transformed. The 7 floors are fully visible now, though only certain visitors can perceive them. I've established new protocols. The barrier remains, but with carefully designed openings, regulated exchanges between realities. The 3 a.m. hour is no longer dangerous, but has become a time of controlled communion. I've taught my staff to recognize the signs, to facilitate rather than fear the connections. The invisible readers still visit, but now they sometimes leave messages beyond cryptic warnings. The scholars share knowledge from dimensions where history took different paths. The skimmers catalog similarities between our collections and theirs. Even the devourers have their purpose. They consume dangerous texts that threaten the delicate balance. I've been training you for this position not because I'm retiring, but because the agreement I negotiated requires additional translators. Your book appeared because you were chosen, not as a replacement, but as an expansion. Tonight, when the lights flicker at 2:57, don't retreat to the desk with a brass lamp. Instead, follow me to the 7th floor. There's someone who wants to meet you. The custodian of a vast library, very different from our own, yet connected in ways we're only beginning to understand. The rules have changed, but they still matter. You'll learn new ones. If you find yourself in an aisle you don't recognize, explore it carefully, but maintain a mental map back. The security cameras show other realities. Document what you see. When you hear pages turning, approach respectfully and introduce yourself. The lights flicker at 3 a.m. That means it's time to open, not close. And if you find a book with your name on it, read it. But remember, you're not just reading the story, you're writing it too. Welcome to your first night as a translator between worlds. The library has been waiting for you.